The emergency sirens wailed across Nexus Station, their sharp cry echoing through corridors filled with panic. Admiral Kethvar of the Centauri Defense Force stood before the massive holographic display, watching red dots spread across the galaxy, map like a disease. Each dot represented a star system consumed by the void swarm. Each dot meant billions of lives lost. "How many systems have we lost in the last cycle?" Kethvar asked, his forearms clasped behind his back. 17, sir," reported his aide, a young Altarian whose blue skin had turned pale with fear. "The swarm is moving faster than our evacuation fleets. They adapt to our weapons within hours of first contact." Kethvar's mandibles clicked in frustration. The void swarm had appeared from the dark space between galaxies 6 months ago. No one knew where they came from or what they wanted. They simply consumed everything in their path, breaking down matter to fuel their endless reproduction. The Coalition had faced threats before: pirates, rogue AI, territorial disputes between species. But nothing like this. The swarm learned from every battle, adapting their technology to counter any weapon used against them. Plasma cannons became useless after the first week. Kinetic rounds lasted 2 weeks. Even the dreaded Vorthon singularity weapons had been neutralized within a month. "Sir, incoming transmission from the War Council," announced the communications officer. The holographic display shifted to show the emergency session. Representatives from 200 species filled the virtual chamber, their voices creating a chaotic din of fear and desperation. At the center sat Chancellor Mordak, the ancient Thraxian whose species had survived 3 galactic extinctions. "Order. Order," Mordak's voice boomed across the chamber. "We face extinction if we cannot unite against this threat. Our finest military analysts have run the calculations. To stand any chance against the swarm when they reach the core worlds, we need at least 10,000 warships in perfect coordination." A Keltharian admiral raised his crystalline arm. "Chancellor, we can muster perhaps 6,000 ships from all coalition forces combined. It won't be enough." "Then we must look beyond the coalition," Mordak replied. "There are species on the galactic rim who might aid us. The warrior clans of Zerion, the techno-mystics of Vaeltar." "What about the humans?" interrupted Commander Zixtal of the insectoid hives. "We have heard stories of their military capabilities." A ripple of murmurs spread through the chamber. Humanity was still relatively new to galactic politics, having made contact only 2 centuries ago. They controlled a small cluster of systems on the outer rim, far from the centers of power and commerce. "The humans," scoffed Admiral Kethvar. "They're barely past their home system. What could they possibly contribute to a battle of this scale?" "Chancellor," Mordak raised a weathered hand. "Do not be so quick to dismiss them. The Syndicate Wars 20 years ago taught us that humans fight differently than other species. When the pirate syndicate captured their colony ship Esperanza, the human response was unexpected." Kethvar remembered those reports. 300 human civilians held hostage, and the pirates demanding territorial concessions. Standard protocol would have been negotiation, perhaps a limited rescue operation. Instead, the humans had tracked down every syndicate base in the sector and systematically destroyed them all, not for resources or territory, but simply because the pirates had threatened their people. "Very well," Kethvar conceded. "Send an envoy to the human worlds. Ask what aid they can provide." The War Council session ended, and within hours, faster than light, messages raced toward human space. The response came back surprisingly quickly. Admiral Sarah Chen, representing the Human Colonial Defense Force, appeared on the holographic communicator. She was younger than Kethvar had expected, with short dark hair and calm brown eyes that seemed to take in everything. "Admiral Chen," Kethvar began, "we face a threat that could end civilization as we know it. The Void Swarm has proven immune to our conventional weapons and tactics. We need every ship we can get for a final stand at the core worlds." Chen listened without interruption as Kethvar explained the situation. When he finished, she was quiet for several moments. "How many ships do you need?" she asked finally. "Our analysts say 10,000 minimum for any chance of success." We can muster 6,000 from the coalition. We're asking all Rim species to contribute what they can. Chen nodded slowly. I'll need to discuss this with our command structure. We'll send what we can. The transmission ended, leaving Kethvar feeling oddly unsettled. There had been something in the human's tone, a confidence that seemed out of place given the desperate circumstances. Over the following days, responses trickled in from across the galaxy. The Zirian warrior clans promised 500 battle cruisers. The Veiltar mystics offered 300 ships equipped with experimental weapons. Other species contributed what they could, but the numbers remained discouraging. Kethvar stood in the tactical center, reviewing fleet positions when his aide approached with a worried expression. Sir, we've received the human response. How many ships are they contributing? Kethvar asked, still focused on the displays. They say they're sending what they can, sir, but long-range sensors only detect a single ship leaving human space. Kethvar's 4 eyes widened in disbelief. A single ship? Are you certain? Yes, sir. 1 vessel, configuration unknown. It's heading directly for the rendezvous point at Kepler Station. Anger flared in Kethvar's chest. He had expected the humans to contribute at least a few dozen ships. They weren't a major power, but surely they could spare more than 1 vessel. Unless, maybe it's a command ship, suggested the aide hopefully. Perhaps they're bringing a small fleet that our sensors can't detect yet. Kethvar wanted to believe that, but as the days passed, only the single human ship appeared on their scopes. No hidden fleet, no cloaked armada. Just 1 lone vessel making its way across the void. The news spread quickly through the coalition forces gathering at Kepler Station. What had started as disappointment turned to barely concealed contempt. Species that had committed hundreds or thousands of ships to the cause began questioning human resolve. I heard they're only sending 1 ship, laughed a Vorthen captain at the officers' mess. Maybe they're planning to ram it into the swarm. Perhaps they expect us to tow them to safety when the battle turns, added a Keltharian commander. But not everyone was laughing. In the deeper levels of Kepler Station, where the coalition's intelligence analysts worked around the clock, a different conversation was taking place. The humans have been remarkably quiet since first contact, noted Chief Analyst Remtar. We know very little about their true military capabilities. They're a Rim species with a few dozen colonies, replied his assistant. How advanced could they be? Remtar pulled up classified files on his terminal. Look at this. Every conflict the humans have been involved in has ended the same way. Complete victory for humanity, often against superior numbers. The Syndicate. Wars. The Talnari border dispute. The Grexon mining incident. In every case, they've used tactics no one expected. So they're clever fighters. That doesn't mean 1 ship can make a difference against the swarm. Perhaps not, Remtar mused. But I keep thinking about something Admiral Chen said during the transmission. She didn't ask how many ships we had or what our battle plans were. She only asked how many ships we needed, as if the number mattered for some reason we don't understand. As the human ship continued its journey toward Kepler Station, the Void Swarm pressed ever closer to the core worlds. 3 more systems fell while the coalition fleet assembled. Time was running out, and many commanders began to wonder if 1 human ship would be enough to tip the balance or if humanity had simply sent a token gesture to a hopeless cause. The answer would come soon enough. The human ship dropped out of hyperspace at the edge of Kepler Station's defensive perimeter, with barely a whisper. Admiral Kethvar watched from the observation deck as the vessel approached, and his disappointment grew with each passing moment. The ship was small, maybe 200 meters long, with a plain gray hull that showed signs of wear and maintenance patches. It looked more like a freight hauler than a warship, compared to the massive coalition dreadnoughts surrounding it, each one stretching over a kilometer in length and bristling with weapon arrays. The human vessel seemed almost pitiful. That's it? Asked Commander Zixtel, his insectoid features twisted in disbelief. That's what humanity sends to face the swarm? Kethvar said nothing, but his 4 arms crossed in frustration. Around them, Other coalition officers gathered at the observation windows, pointing and whispering. The mood was shifting from disappointment to outright mockery. The human ship requested permission to dock, and traffic control assigned it to a small berth in the civilian section. Not even the military docking bays, Kethvar noted with growing irritation. Within an hour, reports began filtering in from the dock workers. The human ship was called the Endurance, and its crew numbered only 12 people. 12. Some coalition vessels carried crews of 50,000. "Admiral, the human captain is requesting a meeting with Strategic Command," reported his aide. "Tell them to submit a formal request through proper channels," Kethvar replied curtly. He had more important things to worry about than managing the hurt feelings of a species that couldn't be bothered to send a real contribution to the war effort. But curiosity eventually got the better of him. That evening, Kethvar made his way to the civilian docking section, accompanied by a small security detail. He wanted to see this human ship for himself. The Endurance sat in its berth like a dull metal brick among the sleek civilian vessels surrounding it. Up close, Kethvar could see that the ship was actually in excellent condition despite its plain appearance. Every surface was clean and perfectly maintained, and the few visible weapon ports were precisely aligned. "Admiral Kethvar?" a voice called from the ship's airlock. Kethvar turned to see a human female approaching. She was average height for her species, with short dark hair and brown eyes that seemed to take in everything at once. Her uniform was simple and practical, with captain's stripes on the shoulders. "I'm Captain Sarah Chen, commanding officer of the Endurance. I was hoping we could discuss the tactical situation." Kethvar's mandibles clicked in annoyance. "Captain, with all respect, I'm not sure what you and your crew of 12 can contribute to a battle involving thousands of ships." Chen's expression didn't change, but something flickered in her eyes. "You'd be surprised what 12 humans can accomplish when properly motivated." "I'm sure you're all very competent," Kethvar replied, his tone making it clear he thought nothing of the sort. "But this isn't a police action against pirates or a border skirmish. The swarm has consumed 17 star systems. They adapt to our weapons faster than we can deploy them." "I've been reviewing the battle reports," Chen said calmly. "The swarm's adaptation process is impressive, but it has limitations." This caught Kethvar's attention despite himself. "What do you mean?" "They adapt to specific weapon configurations and tactical patterns, but adaptation takes time and processing power. The key is to change your approach faster than they can compensate." "Easier said than done," scoffed Commander Zixtal, who had followed Kethvar to the docks. "We've tried random weapon rotations, unpredictable attack patterns, even deliberately chaotic formations. Nothing works for more than a few hours." Chen nodded. "That's because you're still thinking in terms of conventional tactics. The swarm expects military doctrine because that's what they've always faced. But what if you stopped fighting like soldiers and started fighting like humans?" "And what exactly does that mean?" Kethvar asked. Chen smiled, and there was something unsettling about the expression. "It means we cheat." Before either officer could respond, Chen turned and walked back toward her ship. "Admiral, I'd like to request permission for my crew to observe the swarm's attack patterns from the command center. We might notice something your analysts have missed." Kethvar wanted to refuse, but something about the human captain's confidence made him hesitate. "Very well, but don't interfere with operations." "Wouldn't dream of it," Chen replied. Over the next 2 days, the human crew became a familiar sight in the command center. They were quiet and professional, taking notes and asking occasional questions. The other coalition officers largely ignored them, focusing on the massive logistical challenge of coordinating thousands of ships from dozens of different species. But Chief Analyst Rem Tar found himself watching the humans with growing interest. Unlike other observers who focused on the big picture, the humans seemed fascinated by small details. They studied individual swarm drones, analyzed minor variations in attack patterns, and spent hours examining what appeared to be random data fluctuations. "What exactly are you looking for?" Remtar finally asked the human tactical officer, a young man named Lieutenant Torres. "Tells," Torres replied without looking up from his datapad. "Tells?" In human culture, we have games where players try to hide their intentions from opponents. But everyone has unconscious behaviors that reveal what they're really thinking. We call them tells. Remtar's crystalline features shifted in confusion. You're looking for unconscious behaviors in a machine intelligence? Every intelligence has patterns, Torres explained. The swarm adapts, but adaptation follows rules. We're trying to figure out what those rules are. Meanwhile, back at the Endurance, the ship's engineer, a stocky woman named Chief Warrant Officer Martinez, was making modifications to the vessel's systems. Other crews from Coalition ships occasionally passed by and watched her work, but none of them could figure out what she was doing. The changes seemed minor at first. A recalibration of the shield generators, adjustments to the weapon targeting systems, modifications to the ship's computer core. But Martinez worked with the precision of someone following a very specific plan. "What's she doing to that ship?" asked a Keltharian technician watching from a nearby berth. "Maintenance, probably," replied his supervisor. Humans are known to be thorough about that sort of thing. They would have been more concerned if they had seen what Martinez was really doing. The Endurance wasn't just a ship. It was a carefully designed platform for technologies that no Coalition species had ever imagined. The modifications Martinez was making would allow those technologies to function at full capacity when the time came. On the third day, long-range sensors detected the swarm's approach. The enemy force was massive, easily 10 times larger than any previous swarm fleet. Coalition commanders rushed to finalize their battle plans, knowing this would likely be their only chance to stop the mechanical plague before it reached the heavily populated core worlds. In the middle of all this activity, Captain Chen made one final request to meet with Admiral Kethvar. This time she didn't go through proper channels. She simply appeared in his office, somehow having bypassed 3 security checkpoints without anyone noticing. "How did you get in here?" Kethvar demanded. "The same way we're going to beat the swarm," Chen replied calmly. "By doing things they don't expect." "Captain, I don't have time for games. The enemy will arrive within hours, and I have 6,000 ships to coordinate." Chen nodded. "I understand. I just wanted you to know that when the battle begins, the Endurance will need some space to work. I'd recommend keeping Coalition forces at least 50,000 kilometers away from our position." Kethvar stared at her in disbelief. "You want me to clear a 50,000-kilometer bubble around one small ship, in the middle of the largest space battle in galactic history?" "Trust me," Chen said, already heading for the door. "You'll want to give us room to work." As she left, Kethvar found himself staring after her with a mixture of anger and confusion. The human's confidence was either inspiring or completely insane, and he wasn't sure which possibility worried him more. The void swarm arrived like a plague of metal locusts descending from the black between stars. Admiral Kethvar stood in the command center of Kepler Station, watching his tactical displays fill with red enemy contacts. Thousands upon thousands of them, far more than their worst projections had predicted. "Contact count is now exceeding 50,000 individual units," reported the sensor officer, his voice tight with barely controlled panic. "They're maintaining formation at the system's edge." Kethvar's forearms moved across his command console, sending final orders to the Coalition fleet. 6,000 warships from 200 different species hung in space around Kepler Station, the largest military force ever assembled in galactic history. It should have been an inspiring sight, but against the ocean of red dots on the display it felt woefully inadequate. "All fleet elements, this is Admiral Kethvar," he broadcast on the command frequency. "Execute Battle Plan Alpha. Remember, we are not just fighting for our species today. We fight for the right of organic life to exist in this galaxy." The Coalition fleet moved into position with practiced precision. Fourth-hand dreadnoughts formed the heavy battle line, their massive hulls bristling with singularity cannons. Keltharian cruisers took the flanks, their crystal weapon arrays charged and ready. Fast attack wings of Altarian fighters spread out in screening formations, while support vessels loaded with experimental weapons held back in reserve. It was a textbook deployment, the product of months of planning and coordination between the finest military minds in known space. Against any conventional enemy, It would have been devastatingly effective. The swarm began its advance. Unlike organic fleets that moved in recognizable formations, the swarm flowed like liquid metal across space. Individual drones, each one the size of a fighter craft but moving with impossible coordination, formed temporary patterns that dissolved and reformed as needed. No two drones were identical. The swarm had been adapting and evolving with each system it consumed. "Enemy fleet entering maximum weapons range," announced the tactical officer. "All ships report ready to engage." "Open fire," Keithvar commanded. Space erupted in violence. Plasma beams, kinetic slugs, exotic particle weapons, and reality-warping singularity rounds lanced out toward the approaching swarm. For a moment, it looked like the coalition might actually have a chance. Dozens of swarm drones vanished in brilliant explosions, their adaptive hulls overwhelmed by the sheer variety of incoming fire. But the moment lasted only seconds. The remaining swarm drones began to change before Keithvar's eyes. Their hulls shifted color and texture, adapting to deflect or absorb the incoming weapons. Within minutes, plasma beams that had been devastatingly effective were sliding harmlessly off adaptive armor. Kinetic rounds were being caught and absorbed by hull plating that flowed like liquid metal. "Weapons effectiveness dropping rapidly across all frequencies," reported the tactical officer. "The swarm is adapting faster than our previous encounters." Keithvar's mandibles clicked in frustration. They had expected this, but seeing it happen in real time was still a shock. The coalition fleet continued to pour fire into the advancing enemy, but with each passing minute, fewer swarm drones were being destroyed. The enemy reached engagement range and began to return fire. Swarm weapons were unlike anything in coalition arsenals. Instead of firing discrete projectiles or beams, the drones projected fields of destructive energy that seemed to unravel matter at the molecular level. When these fields touched a coalition ship, entire sections of hull simply ceased to exist, leaving behind perfectly smooth cavities. "We're losing ships across the entire battle line," reported Commander Zixtel from his position at the Fleet Coordination Station. "The Vorthons are requesting permission to retreat and regroup." "Denied," Keithvar replied grimly. "If we break formation now, they'll overwhelm us piecemeal. All ships, maintain position and continue firing. Switch to alternating weapon frequencies. On my mark." The coalition had planned for this moment. Every ship began cycling through different weapon types in random patterns, hoping to stay ahead of the swarm's adaptation process. For a brief time, it worked. Swarm casualties increased as the enemy intelligence struggled to adapt to constantly changing threats. But the reprieve was temporary. The swarm learned from each exchange, and its adaptation process accelerated. Soon, even rapidly changing weapon frequencies became predictable patterns that the enemy could counter. "Sir, we've lost the Vorthon flagship Worldbreaker," announced the communications officer. Admiral Gorthak's last transmission reported complete weapons failure before contact was lost. Keithvar watched helplessly as his carefully planned battle formation began to crumble. The coalition fleet was dying, ship by ship, and there was nothing he could do to stop it. Every tactic they had prepared, every contingency they had planned for was being systematically countered by an enemy that seemed to think faster than organic minds could comprehend. "Admiral," called a voice from across the command center. "The human ship is requesting permission to join the engagement." Keithvar turned to see Lieutenant Torres, the human tactical officer who had been observing their operations for the past 3 days. The young man's expression was calm despite the chaos erupting around them. "Your ship?" Keithvar asked in disbelief. "Lieutenant, we're losing dreadnoughts out there. What can one small vessel possibly accomplish?" Captain Chen asked. "Me to relay a message," Torres replied. "She says it's time to stop fighting like soldiers and start fighting like humans." Before Keithvar could respond, Captain Chen's voice crackled over the emergency communication channel. Her transmission was being broadcast to every ship in the Coalition fleet. "Coalition Command, this is Captain Sarah Chen aboard the Endurance. We're moving to intercept the swarm. Please maintain your distance from our position and prepare to receive tactical updates." On the main display, Kethvar watched a single blue dot separate itself from the coalition formation and begin accelerating toward the heart of the swarm. The Endurance was moving fast, faster than its engine specifications should have allowed, heading directly into the thickest concentration of enemy drones. "What are they doing?" whispered Commander Zixtal. "That's suicide." Kethvar found himself holding his breath as the tiny human ship plunged into the mechanical storm. Hundreds of swarm drones converged on the Endurance, their destructive fields reaching out to tear the small vessel apart. Then, something impossible happened. The Endurance didn't die. Instead, it seemed to dance between the incoming attacks, moving with a grace and precision that shouldn't have been possible for a ship of its size. But more than that, it was fighting back in ways that defied everything Kethvar knew about space combat. Instead of firing conventional weapons, the human ship was projecting some kind of interference pattern that caused nearby swarm drones to become sluggish and unresponsive. Other drones simply exploded for no apparent reason, as if their own systems were turning against them. "How are they doing that?" demanded Zix. Tal. Torres smiled, and for the first time since the battle began, there was confidence in his expression. "We've been studying the swarm's communication protocols for the past 3 days. Every adaptation they make requires coordination between drones through quantum-encrypted channels. Captain Chen's ship isn't just jamming those channels, it's injecting false data into them." "False data?" "We're making the swarm drones think they're being attacked by weapons that don't exist. Their adaptation protocols are going crazy trying to counter threats that aren't really there. Meanwhile, our actual attacks are being misidentified as harmless background radiation." Kethvar stared at the display in amazement. The Endurance was carving a path through the swarm formation, leaving behind a trail of confused and disabled enemy drones. But the human ship was moving deeper into the enemy formation with apparent suicidal determination. "Coalition fleet, this is Chen." The captain's voice came over the communications channel again. Her tone was calm, almost casual, despite being surrounded by thousands of hostile drones. "We're about to begin the main event. I recommend all ships retreat to minimum safe distance. Things are about to get loud." "Minimum safe distance for what?" Kethvar demanded into his communicator. Chen's response chilled him to his core. "We're going to teach the swarm what it feels like to be human." The Endurance hung in space at the heart of the swarm formation, surrounded by thousands of hostile drones that circled like mechanical sharks. Admiral Kethvar watched from Kepler Station's command center, unable to understand how the small, human ship had survived this long in the middle of the enemy fleet. "Captain Chen, your position is completely surrounded," he transmitted. "Request immediate extraction to coalition lines." Chen's voice came back steady and calm. "Negative, Admiral. We're exactly where we need to be. All crew, this is the captain. Lights out, people. Let's show them what we brought from home." What happened next would be talked about in military academies for generations to come. The Endurance began to transform. Hull panels that had appeared to be simple maintenance access points suddenly retracted, revealing weapon arrays unlike anything in coalition databases. The ship's plain gray exterior split open like a flower blooming, exposing systems that pulsed with exotic energy signatures. What had looked like a simple freight hauler now showed its true nature as the most advanced weapons platform anyone had ever seen. "By the void," whispered Commander Zixtal. "What is that thing?" Lieutenant Torres grinned from his position at the observation station. "That's the Endurance showing her true colors. She's not a warship, Admiral. She's a weapons laboratory." The human ship's transformation wasn't just physical. Energy readings spiked across every spectrum as systems came online that shouldn't have been possible to fit in such a small hull. Gravitational distortions rippled out from the vessel, causing nearby swarm drones to tumble helplessly through space. "Impossible," breathed Kethvar. "How did they fit all that technology into such a small ship?" "Humans are good at making things smaller and more efficient," Torres explained. "We've had practice. Every war we've fought has taught us how to pack more destructive power into less space." The swarm drones recovered quickly from their initial confusion and began converging on the Endurance with renewed aggression. Their adaptive hulls shimmered as they prepared to counter whatever new weapons the human ship might deploy. They were not prepared for what came next. The Endurance opened fire, and space erupted in impossible colors. The human weapons didn't just shoot at the swarm drones. They seemed to attack the very concept of what the drones were. Matter conversion beams turned enemy hulls into plasma before the swarm could adapt. Temporal distortion fields caused drones to age thousands of years in seconds, crumbling to dust. Quantum uncertainty bombs made targets probabilistically cease to exist. But the most devastating weapons weren't the exotic physics experiments. They were the simple ones that the humans had perfected through centuries of warfare. Kinetic slugs, accelerated to significant fractions of light speed, punched through adaptive armor before it could react. Chemical explosives with yields measured in megatons vaporized clusters of drones. Old-fashioned particle beams, boosted by technologies the Coalition didn't recognize, carved through swarm formations like hot knives through ice. "They're using everything at once," observed Chief Analyst Remtar from his monitoring station. "Every weapon type we've encountered in galactic history, plus dozens we've never seen before." The swarm tried to adapt, but adaptation required time and data. Human weapons changed faster than the swarm's analysis systems could process. Just as the enemy drones began to develop resistance to one type of attack, the Endurance would switch to something completely different. More importantly, the human ship wasn't fighting like a warship at all. It moved like a predator, using the debris of destroyed drones as cover, employing the swarm's own formation against them. When groups of drones tried to coordinate attacks, the Endurance would strike at the command nodes, disrupting their ability to work together. "This is incredible," Kithavar muttered, watching hundreds of swarm drones fall to a single ship. "How many weapon systems do they have on that vessel?" "All of them," Torres replied simply. "The Endurance isn't just one ship, Admiral. It's humanity's entire military history compressed into 200 meters of hull. Every weapon we've ever built, every tactic we've ever used, every lesson we've learned from every war we've fought." The swarm began to retreat from the human ship, their drones pulling back to regroup and analyze this unprecedented threat. But the Endurance didn't let them go. It pursued the retreating drones with relentless efficiency, continuing to rain destruction on them with weapons that seemed to multiply with each passing minute. "How is that possible?" demanded Zixtal. "No ship can carry that many different weapon systems." "The weapons aren't all physical," Torres explained. "A lot of them are software. Viruses that turn enemy systems against themselves. Logic bombs that cause AI to crash when they try to process certain data patterns. Information warfare taken to levels you can't imagine." As if to demonstrate his point, several swarm drones suddenly began attacking each other with no apparent provocation. Their formation dissolved into chaos as infected units spread corrupted data through their quantum communication networks. But even as the Endurance carved through the swarm forces with impossible efficiency, Kethvar realized the truth of their situation. One ship, no matter how advanced, couldn't destroy 50,000 enemy drones. The human vessel was impressive, even terrifying, but it was still vastly outnumbered. "Captain Chen," he transmitted, "your performance has been extraordinary, but you can't fight the entire swarm alone. Request permission to send support." Chen's laugh echoed through the command center. "Admiral, you still don't understand. We're not here to fight the swarm alone. We're here to teach you how to fight them." "Teach us what?" "How to cheat." The Endurance suddenly stopped its attack and began broadcasting on all frequencies. Not communications, but raw data streams containing information that made Coalition sensor officers scramble to decode them. "What are they transmitting?" Kethvar asked. Torres consulted his datapad. "Everything. Combat algorithms, weapon optimization protocols, tactical analysis subroutines. They're uploading humanity's entire military knowledge base to every ship in the Coalition fleet. That's impossible. The data volume alone would take hours to transmit. Not if you know how to compress it properly. Humans have been sharing information efficiently since before we left our home planet. We've had practice." Across the Coalition fleet, ship systems began to update themselves with human tactical data. Weapon arrays that had been useless against adaptive swarm armor suddenly became devastating as targeting systems learned to predict and counter enemy adaptation patterns. Defensive systems began anticipating attacks before they were launched, using analysis algorithms refined through centuries of human warfare. But most importantly, the Coalition crews began to think differently. The human data didn't just provide new weapons and tactics. It provided a new way of approaching warfare itself. Instead of following rigid military doctrine, crews began improvising and adapting, fighting more like humans and less like soldiers. The tide of battle began to turn. All Coalition vessels. Chen's voice came over the communications channel. You have 30 seconds to get clear. We're about to deploy our main weapon. Main weapon? Kethvar asked in disbelief. What could be more powerful than what you've already shown us? Torres smiled, and there was something almost apologetic in his expression. The one thing humans are better at than any other species in the galaxy, Admiral. The thing that makes us truly dangerous. And what is that? We never know when to quit. The Coalition fleet pulled back to what they hoped was a safe distance, watching as the Endurance hung alone in the middle of the swarm formation. Admiral Kethvar could barely comprehend what he was seeing on his tactical displays. The human ship had single-handedly destroyed nearly 1,000 enemy drones, but tens of thousands still remained. What's their main weapon? He asked Lieutenant Torres. Some kind of planet-killer bomb? Torres shook his head. Nothing so crude, Admiral. Captain Chen is about to deploy humanity's ultimate weapon, the thing that made us the dominant species on our homeworld, which is our ability to learn faster than our enemies can adapt. Before Kethvar could ask what that meant, the Endurance began its final transformation. The ship's hull split open completely, revealing not more weapons, but a massive computer core that pulsed with quantum processing power. Energy cascaded off the exposed systems as they came online, creating distortions in spacetime itself. Coalition fleet, this is Captain Chen, came the transmission. What you're about to see is the result of 300 years of human military evolution. We call it the Tactical Evolution Engine. It's designed to analyze any opponent and develop countermeasures faster than they can adapt to our countermeasures. The machine at the heart of the Endurance began to work. Data streams poured out from the human ship, not just to the Coalition fleet, but directly into the swarm's own communication networks. But this wasn't an attack in any conventional sense. The Tactical Evolution Engine was studying every aspect of swarm behavior, learning their adaptation patterns, understanding the rules that governed their evolution. And then it began to break those rules. The swarm adapts by analyzing threats and developing countermeasures, Torres explained as he watched the process unfold. But adaptation requires processing time. The engine feeds them false threat data faster than they can analyze it, forcing their systems to adapt to problems that don't exist. On the display, Kethvar watched swarm drones beginning to behave erratically. Their adaptive hulls shifted constantly as they tried to counter imaginary weapons. Their formations dissolved as command algorithms became overloaded with conflicting data. But the real genius of the human system revealed itself when the Coalition fleet rejoined the battle. All ships, this is Chen. Resume engagement. Follow. The targeting solutions we're providing. New data flooded into Coalition weapon systems, but this wasn't just improved targeting information. The Tactical Evolution Engine was predicting exactly how the swarm would adapt to each attack and providing countermeasures in real-time. When Vorthan singularity cannons fired at swarm drones, the engine had already calculated how the enemy hulls would adapt and adjusted the weapons to exploit the weaknesses that adaptation would create. When Keltharian crystal arrays projected energy beams, the targeting systems knew exactly where to aim to hit drones before they could finish their defensive transformations. For the first time since the battle began, Coalition weapons were consistently effective against swarm forces. Impossible, breathed Commander Zixtal. They're predicting the adaptation process. Better than that, Torres replied. They're controlling it. Watch. The Endurance began broadcasting specific frequency patterns directly into the swarm communication networks. To Kethvar's amazement, groups of enemy drones began adapting in predictable ways, their hulls changing to counter threats that the engine was making them think were coming. And then coalition weapons would strike exactly where those adaptations created new vulnerabilities. They're making the swarm adapt incorrectly, Kethvar realized, feeding them false information about our weapons so they adapt against the wrong things. Exactly. The swarm's greatest strength was their ability to adapt faster than organic minds could think. But they never faced a mind that could think faster than they could adapt. The battle became a deadly dance between artificial intelligences. The swarm's collective consciousness struggled to process the torrents of conflicting data being fed into their systems, while the tactical evolution engine stayed one step ahead, predicting and countering every attempt at adaptation. But the engine was doing more than just jamming enemy systems. It was learning from every exchange, growing smarter with each passing minute. And it was sharing that knowledge with every ship in the Coalition fleet. Coalition forces, this is Chen. We're updating your tactical systems with adaptive combat protocols. You should now be able to maintain weapons effectiveness even without our direct support. Across the fleet, ship computers began to rewire themselves with human-designed algorithms. Weapon systems that had been following static firing patterns for centuries suddenly became dynamic and unpredictable. Defensive systems learned to anticipate attacks by analyzing enemy behavior in real-time. The transformation wasn't just technological, it was philosophical. Coalition crews found themselves thinking like humans, improvising solutions to problems they had never encountered before. When traditional tactics failed, they invented new ones on the spot. When weapons became ineffective, they found creative ways to make them work again. "This is incredible," whispered Chief Analyst Remtar. "They're not just sharing their technology, they're sharing their way of thinking." The swarm began to retreat, their drones pulling back from engagements they could no longer win. But the Coalition fleet, now equipped with human tactical systems, pursued them relentlessly. Every time the swarm tried to regroup and adapt, the engine would feed them new false data, forcing them to adapt incorrectly and become vulnerable to follow-up attacks. "Captain Chen," transmitted Kethvar, "the enemy is attempting to withdraw from the system. Should we pursue?" "Negative, Admiral. Let them go. They'll spread word of what happened here to the rest of the swarm. Every drone they encounter will now be loaded with corrupted adaptation algorithms. This battle isn't just about winning here and now. It's about making sure they can never be as effective again." Kethvar looked at his tactical displays in wonder. The massive swarm fleet that had threatened to overwhelm them was now fleeing in disorder, their ranks broken by weapons and tactics they couldn't counter. "How?" he asked simply. Torres consulted his data pad one final time. "The swarm made one critical error, Admiral. They assumed that adaptation was always an advantage. But humans learned long ago that sometimes the best strategy is to make your enemy adapt in ways that hurt them more than they help. And your tactical evolution engine can do this against any opponent. Any opponent that relies on adaptation and learning? Yes. The engine analyzes their learning patterns and feeds them information designed to make them learn the wrong lessons. It turns their greatest strength into their greatest weakness." The Endurance began to reconfigure itself back to its original appearance as the last swarm drones fled the system. Hull panels closed over weapon arrays, exotic energy signatures, faded, and within minutes the ship looked like an ordinary freight hauler again. "That's it?" asked Zixtel. "You're just going to hide all that incredible technology?" Torres shrugged. "The best weapon is one your enemies don't know you have. Besides, the real weapon was never the hardware, it was the software. And that's now running on every ship in your fleet." Kethvar realized the truth of what had happened. Humanity hadn't sent a single ship to contribute to the battle. They had sent a teacher. The Endurance and its crew hadn't come to fight the swarm. They had come to show everyone else how to fight them. "Captain Chen," he transmitted. "On behalf of the Coalition, I want to thank you for your assistance. Your actions today may have saved civilization itself." Chen's voice came back with what sounded like amusement. You're welcome, Admiral. But don't thank us yet. This was just the field test. Wait until you see what we can do when we really try. As the human ship prepared to depart, Kethvar found himself with one final question. Captain, why didn't you tell us what you were planning? Why let us think you were only sending one small ship? Chen's answer would stay with him for the rest of his life. Because, Admiral, sometimes the most important battles are won before the enemy realizes they're fighting. The swarm thought they were facing 6,000 ships with conventional weapons and predictable tactics. They never suspected they were actually fighting the entire military history of humanity, compressed into algorithms and set loose in their communication networks. The Endurance jumped to hyperspace, leaving behind a coalition fleet that was no longer the same. They had learned to think like humans, to fight like humans, to adapt and improvise and never give up. And across the galaxy, the swarm would discover that their greatest advantage had become their greatest vulnerability, thanks to a species that had turned warfare into an art form and was willing to teach that art to anyone who needed to learn it. The war was far from over. But for the first time since the swarm had appeared, organic life had a chance to win. Not through superior numbers or advanced technology, but through something uniquely human: the ability to make their enemies defeat themselves.